The clock in the outside broadcast truck read 19:38 when Emory Vance told his cameraman to crowd the guard. I heard it because I was sitting in the gallery seat with 9 monitors in front of me and a headset clamped over my ears, and because talkback goes everywhere. That is the first thing anyone should understand about a live broadcast. The audience sees one picture. The gallery sees all of them. And the gallery hears every word the presenter says when he thinks he is speaking privately to his crew. "Ross," Vance said in that warm, unhurried voice the whole realm knew from the 10 o'clock bulletin, "get in tight on him. Right in. I want him in your lens like you're standing on his boots. If he blinks, I want the blink." Ross on camera 2 said, "How tight?" "Tight enough that he has to decide something," Vance said. I remember writing the time down. Not because I suspected anything. I was 29 years old, 3 years into a job I loved, and I had never in my life imagined that I would one day be asked to swear to a timeline in front of a princess of the realm. I wrote it down because I was the vision archivist as well as the second mixer, and my job that night was to log every camera cut on the Vigil broadcast so the record would be complete. The Court of Lamps had never been filmed before. Not once in 61 years. The king had granted permission for one night only, and my department head had said to me twice, in the tone of a man who wanted it on record that he had said it, "Delia, log everything. Everything. This tape goes in the vault forever." He got his wish. The tape did go in the vault. What none of us knew at 19:38 on the night of the vigil was that it would take a burned hand, a dismissed guardsman, an old widow nobody would listen to, and a crown prince standing bareheaded in the rain at 2 in the morning to get it back out again. Let me set the picture, because the picture is the whole case. The Court of Lamps sits behind the eastern colonnade of the palace, a small square courtyard of pale stone with nothing in it but a wall and a flame. The wall is the remembrance wall, 406 names cut into it, the fallen of the Ravensmere crossing and the long winter that followed. In front of the wall stands a plinth, and on the plinth stands the lamp. It is not a symbol of a flame. It is a flame. It was lit 61 years ago from the burning wreckage of a bridge, and it has not gone out since, and there are 2 men on the palace staff whose entire employment consists of making certain that it does not. Once a year on the last evening of autumn, one guardsman of the household stands the long vigil at that lamp. He is chosen by the regiment, not by the palace. He stands from dusk until the flame is topped at midnight. He does not speak. He does not move. At the 90th minute, the court observes 90 seconds. 1 second for every year since the crossing, the arithmetic of which had been quietly wrong for 2 decades, and which nobody had ever had the heart to correct, and in those 90 seconds, nothing in the court makes a sound. That was the ceremony we had been let in to film. 6 cameras and a drone we were not permitted to fly. I had begged for a 7th position on the colonnade and been given it, grudgingly, by the palace's head of communications, a smooth, tired man named Bellamy Crane who kept telling everyone that this was a new chapter in the relationship between the household and the public. He said it to me. He said it to Vance. He said it, I later learned, to the crown prince who had not asked. And the guardsman on the plinth's left, in the red tunic and the black bearskin, rifle at his side, white gloves, boots you could have shaved in, was Lance-Corporal Wystan Hale. I had never heard his name before that night. By midnight, I would never forget it. The interview was not on the running order. I want to be exact about that because it became the thing everyone argued about afterward, and because in this business the running order is the closest thing we have to scripture. I had the running order in front of me in a plastic sleeve, marked up in my own handwriting. Item 9, wide court vigil 90-second silence. Item 10, Vance, piece to camera colonnade. There is no item that says interview guard. At 19:39, Vance walked out of his mark on the colonnade, across the court, over the stones, and stood beside Wystan Hale. In the gallery, my director said a word I will not repeat and then said, "What is he doing?" "He's doing an interview," I said. "With whom?" I did not answer, because the answer was on monitor 2 and it was absurd. Ross was already moving. Camera 2 came up tight, Vance's shoulder in the left of frame, and beyond it the guardsman's face under the bearskin, lit hard from the right by our own lamp because the court's own light is only the flame and we had, of course, brought our own. Cut to 2, my director said, because she was a professional, and because when your star anchor goes off-script live to the realm you do not sit and watch him from the wide. We cut to 2. And so, for the 11 minutes that followed, the entire realm watched the vigil of the lamps through one lens, from one angle, 4 feet from Emory Vance's face, and saw exactly and only what that one lens could see. Everything that happened afterward happened because of that. I'm standing, Vance said to the realm, beside a man who is not allowed to talk to me. He let that sit. He was very good. I have never pretended otherwise, and I will not start now. Emory Vance was the finest live broadcaster of his generation, and if you had asked me at 19:30 that evening who I most admired in the building, I might have said his name. Lance-Corporal, he said, half-turning, you can't answer me. That's the rule, isn't it? Whatever I say, whatever anyone says. You stand there. Hale stood there. There's a word for that, Vance said, and now his voice dropped into the register he used for the 10 o'clock, the one that made you lean toward the screen. The palace calls it discipline, tradition, honor. I've been thinking on my way over here tonight about what else you could call it, because I'll tell you what I see. I see a man in a costume standing at a fire in a courtyard nobody is allowed into for an anniversary of a battle that half this realm couldn't find on a map. And I'm told I must find that moving. He looked into Ross's lens. I'd like to know why. In the gallery, nobody spoke. There was a peculiar quality to that silence. It was not shock. We were all far too experienced to be shocked. It was the silence of 11 people, simultaneously calculating what their evening had just become. They tell me you have a duty, Vance went on. Let's test it. Let's see what your duty actually consists of. He stepped closer. How many of them are yours? Hale did not look at him. The names, Vance said, and gestured at the wall behind them without turning to it, a flick of the hand, the way a man waves off a waiter. 406. Do you know any of them, Lance-Corporal, or is that not part of the job? Do they tell you the names, or do they just tell you where to stand? I did not know it then. Nobody in that gallery knew it, and nobody in the realm knew it. And if you had asked Emory Vance, he would have said, quite honestly, that it was a rhetorical question. The 8th name in the 4th row of the remembrance wall is Sergeant Comenies. Ross went tighter. Vance had asked for tight, and Ross gave him tight, and the frame narrowed until it held nothing but 2 faces. The anchor's, alive with a kind of pleased ferocity, and the guardsman's, absolutely still. I want to describe Hale's face as it was on my monitor at 1944, because the whole realm later claimed to have seen it, and almost nobody actually did. He was perhaps 30, a long, plain, unremarkable face, gray eyes fixed on a point above and beyond the far colonnade, which is where a man on the vigil is trained to fix them. There was no anger in it. That is what I have never been able to make people understand, and I have tried, in rooms far grander than the one I am fit for. He was not enduring Vance. He was not tolerating him, or hating him, or waiting him out. Emory Vance was, to that face, a weather event, something happening in the vicinity of a duty that was not about him at all. And his mouth moved, once very slightly. He was counting. We worked that out later from the time code. At 1944, the vigil was 6 minutes from the 90 seconds, and the man standing the vigil counts them down, because when the 90 begins, he must be the stillest thing in the court, and a man does not arrive at that condition by accident. He was counting himself into it while a famous man stood 18 inches away and asked him whether his dead had names. Nothing, Vance said. He turned back to the lens with an expression of mild, weary vindication. Ladies and gentlemen, You're watching an institution that has stopped being able to explain itself. I'm going to try one last time." He turned back to Hale. He lifted his hand, the microphone hand, and he brought it up in front of the guardsman's eyes and moved it slowly from side to side. The way you would check whether a man was conscious. The way you would test a mannequin in a shop window. That went out live, to 3 million people. "Anything," Vance said, "anything at all in there." Behind them, out of frame, out of the lens, out of the world as far as the realm was concerned, the crew were moving. Here is what Camera 2 could not see, and here is the entire injustice of the next 24 hours in one sentence. The crowding of the guardsmen had pushed the whole shot upstream. Ross had come in tight, as ordered. To get tight, he had come forward, and to get out of Ross's frame, the sound recordist had backed off toward the plinth, and to keep his boom out of the top of the picture, he had backed off further, and behind him, because it had nowhere else to be, because we had never been allowed to rig in that court and were making it up as we went, stood our lighting stand. 2 meters of aluminum, a sandbag at the foot of it, a 2-kilowatt head on the top, and one leg of it on the lowest step of the plinth. The plinth on which the Lamp of Remembrance had burned for 61 years. I saw it on monitor 6, which was the wide from the colonnade and which was not on air, and which for the whole of the 11 minutes was showing an empty picture to nobody but me. I saw the sound man's shoulder go into the stand. I saw the stand begin to travel. It was very slow. That is the thing about a 2-meter light stand going over. It is slow for the first half second, and then it is not slow at all. And there is a boy's physics inevitability to it that you can see coming and cannot do anything about from a gallery 200 meters away with a headset on. I said into talkback, "Stand the asterisk stand." And Lance-Corporal Wystan Hale, who had not moved for 2 hours and 11 minutes, moved. The realm did not see him move. The realm saw, on camera 2, in a tight frame containing 2 faces, the guardsman's eyes come down and lock onto something out of shot, and then the guardsman come forward, hard and fast, straight at Emory Vance. That is what 3 million people saw. I have watched that 11-second sequence more times than any person alive, and I will tell you now without any pleasure. From camera 2, it is damning. From camera 2, it looks exactly like what everybody said it was. A guardsman, goaded past his limit, breaking his post and coming at a journalist. From camera 6, which nobody saw, it looks like this. The stand goes, Hale's eyes come down. He comes off his post in 3 strides. He does not run. He does not lower his shoulder. He goes past the recordist so cleanly the man does not feel him, and he crosses in front of the plinth. Emory Vance, who has been playing to camera 2 and has no idea that anything is happening behind him, takes 1 step backward into the space Hale needs. Vance's heel finds the wet edge of the lowest step. He goes down, not violently, not thrown. He goes down the way a man goes down on a wet stone step in expensive shoes, with his arms out and his microphone gone, and he sits down on the flags of the Court of Lamps. And Wystan Hale does not look at him. Hale reaches past him up and catches the falling light stand with his left forearm and pushes it back and away from the plinth. And it swings, as it must, and the 2-kilowatt head at the top of it comes around in an arc, and the head is lit and has been lit for 40 minutes and is at that moment somewhere in the region of 250 degrees. He puts his right hand on it, his right hand in a white cotton ceremonial glove. He holds it there, I have timed it on the tape, at 1.5 seconds until the stand is stable, until it settles back onto its own feet, until the flame on the plinth stops shivering. Then he takes his hand away and he takes the stand's weight properly and he sets it down on the flags, well clear. Then he goes back to his post. He is 17 seconds from the beginning of the 90. He stands and squares up, and his eyes go to the point above the far colonnade, and he stands the 90 seconds with a hand inside a scorched glove, and his face does not change at all, And behind him, out of frame, Emory Vance is getting to his feet on live television with an expression of pure astonishment, saying, into a microphone he has picked back up off the ground, "He struck me, ladies and gentlemen, live on air. A royal guardsman has just struck me." The clock on the gallery wall said 1952. By 2052, Wystan Hale would not be a guardsman at all. I have the hour. I want to lay it out plainly, because it is the part of this story that people find hardest to believe, and because when it was finally read into the record, in a chamber with a fire in it and a princess at the head of the table, the man reading it had to stop twice. 1952. The 90 seconds begin. The court is silent. Vance, having announced an assault to 3 million people, has the professional good sense not to keep talking through the vigil and stands at the edge of the flags with a hand pressed to his hip, looking, for the first time in his career, uncertain about a decision. 1953-30. The 90 end. Our broadcast goes to the colonnade for the piece to camera. Vance does not do the scripted piece. He does 90 seconds of raw, extemporized, extraordinary television about the state of an institution that has just, in his words, put a hand on a journalist for asking a question. He does not mention the light stand. He does not mention it because he did not see it. That is the truthful thing to say about Emory Vance, and it took me a long time to be willing to say it. At 1953, he did not know he was lying. 1958. We come off air. In the gallery, my director takes her headset off and holds it in both hands and says, "Somebody get me the wide." 20:01. I am running the wide. Camera 6, the colonnade angle, 11 minutes of it. I see the stand go. I see the guardsman catch it. I see where his hand goes. I sit back in my chair and I say, out loud to a room of 11 people, "He didn't touch him. He caught the light." 20:03. My director calls the network's news controller, a man named Lysander Poole, at his home, and tells him there is an angle that changes the story. 20:06. Poole calls the truck back and speaks to Emory Vance for 4 minutes. I do not know what was said. I have never known. But I know that at 20:11 our late bulletin was extended by 12 minutes, and I know that the item promoted to the top of it was titled in the running order on my screen in the network's own house font. Guard strikes anchor, live, VANCE assaulted AT Palace Vigil. 2014. Bellamy Crane, head of communications at the palace, telephones the network. The call lasts 90 seconds. Crane does not ask what the other cameras show. He does not ask whether there are other cameras. He asks one question, and the question is this going to run? He is told that it is going to run. 2019. Crane finds the Crown Prince. I was not there for that. I have to give it to you as it was given to the board from the mouth of the man himself, and I will not embellish it because he did not. Crown Prince Rowan was in the amber corridor, in white tie, 11 minutes from the door of a state dinner, for the trade delegation of a country whose foreign minister had already been kept waiting once that season. The king was inside. The Princess Adela was inside. Rowan was the last one through the door because he always was, because that was the family joke. Crane came at him with a tablet in his hands and the picture already playing on it, and he played it, camera 2, tight, 11 seconds. The guardsman's eyes coming down, and the guardsman coming forward, and a famous man sitting down on the stones. And he said the sentence that would end his own career 8 days later. He said, "Sir, we have 60 minutes. And Rowan, 29 years old, in white tie, with the doors of the great hall standing open in front of him, and a foreign minister waiting behind them, and 11 seconds of the worst image the household had generated in a decade playing on a screen 6 inches from his face. Rowan looked at it, and looked away, and said 4 words. "Do what you must." Then he went in to dinner. I want to be fair to him. I've been in rooms since where people were not fair to him, and I found I did not enjoy it as much as I expected to. He did not order the dismissal. He did not know what Standing Order 9 was. Almost nobody did. He was a young man handed a burning thing at the worst possible moment by a senior official who had already decided, and he said the thing that young men say when they want a competent adult to make a problem go away. But he said it. He has never once, in all the times he has been asked, tried to say that he did not. Asterisk 2024. Crane invokes Standing Order 9. 9 is old. It was written after a guardsman went into a tavern in his tunic in 1961 and was photographed doing something regrettable, and it exists for exactly one purpose: to allow the household to discharge a man immediately without a hearing, for conduct in uniform, witnessed publicly, bringing the household into disrepute. It requires no evidence beyond the witnessing. It requires no defense. It requires the signature of the household controller and the verbal assent of a member of the family. Crane had the assent. He had 4 words of it, given in a corridor by a man on his way to dinner. He went and got the signature. Asterisk 2031. The controller signs. The order is timed and dated, effective immediately. Asterisk 2033. Lance-Corporal Wystan Hale, who has been standing the Long Vigil for 2 hours and 51 minutes and has 3 hours and 27 minutes left to stand, is relieved of the post by his own captain, a man named Farron Slade, who had commanded Hale's company for 6 years, and who, when he was later asked to describe walking across the court of lamps to do it, was unable to finish the sentence. Slade told him at the plinth he would not tell him anywhere else. He said afterwards that a man who has stood a vigil should be told standing. Hale said, "Sir." Slade said, "Wystan, tell me what happened." And Hale said, and this is verbatim from Slade's evidence, "The lamp was going over, sir." That is all he said. That is all he ever said that night to anyone, and it is the sentence on which I have built the rest of my life, professionally speaking, because it is a sentence that contains the entire truth of the matter, and it explains absolutely nothing to anyone who was not there. Captain Slade did not know about the light stand. Nobody had shown him the wide. He looked at his lance-corporal, and he heard a man say something that sounded, to a soldier holding a discharge order in his hand, like a man who had gone to pieces in front of 3 million people and was now not making sense. He said, "The vigil is being stood by Corporal Whitlock. You'll come with me." Asterisk 2041. The guardroom at the eastern gate. 2052. Wystan Hale surrenders his rifle, his belt, his bearskin, and the household cipher from his collar, and signs the receipt, and walks out of the eastern gate of the Palace of Eldermore in a borrowed civilian coat, into the rain, with 60 minutes and 4 seconds having elapsed since Emory Vance sat down on the stones of the Court of Lamps. I was not there for that either. But 11 days later, in the chamber with the fire, I sat and listened to the guardroom clerk, a boy of 19, so frightened his voice came out in pieces, describe the surrender of the belt. He said the drill is that a man lays his belt across his 2 hands and offers it. He said Hale did not do that. He said Hale offered the belt on his left hand only, and held his right down at his side, closed, and when the clerk asked him to sign, he took the pen in his left hand and signed with it, badly, like a schoolboy, and apologized for the signature. The clerk said he thought it was nerves. The clerk said he had been thinking about it every night since. Now, I have to account for myself, because I have been telling you what other people did in that hour, and I was in the building where the other thing was done, and I did not stop it. At 20:04, I copied the wide onto a drive. I want a great deal of credit for that, and I am not going to be given it because at 20:04 I did it as an archivist, not as a witness. It was a reflex. Log everything, my department head had said. The Court of Lamps had never been filmed and would, I assumed, never be filmed again, and I had 11 minutes of unbroadcast material from inside it, and I copied it because that is what I am for. At 20:22, I went up to the 5th floor with the drive in my pocket to find Lysander Poole. Poole is not a villain. This is the second unhelpful thing I have to say to people who want this story to be simple. He is a careful, dry, unhappy man who has spent 30 years keeping a newsroom out of court, and when I stood in his doorway and said, "There's another angle and it shows," he was catching a falling light. He did not laugh at me, and he did not throw me out. He said, "Show me." I showed him, on his own screen. Camera 6, the whole 11 minutes, and I stopped it at the frame where Hale's white glove closes on a 2-kilowatt lamp head. Poole watched it twice. Then he sat back and took his glasses off and said, "Emory says he was struck." "Emory was facing the wrong way," I said. "Emory says he was struck," Poole said again, and put his glasses back on. And that was the moment. I am precise about this, because I have gone over it so many times. That was the exact moment at which it stopped being a question of what had happened, and became a question of what the network had already said had happened. "We are 11 minutes from air with an assault at the top of the bulletin," Poole said. "The palace has confirmed the man is being dealt with." "The palace has confirmed it, Delia. They dismissed him, inside the hour. Do you understand what that does? They dismissed him, so it happened. Their own people say it happened." I said, "Their own people haven't seen this." And Lysander Poole said the sentence I have never forgiven him for, and which, I am quite sure, he had persuaded himself was a responsible thing to say. He said, "Then that is the palace's problem, isn't it?" The late bulletin ran at 22:00. It was 18 minutes long, and I have never watched it back in full, and I do not intend to. The headline sequence was cut by a man I liked, to music, and the 11 seconds of camera 2 ran 4 times before the first advertisement, twice at speed, once at half, once frozen on the frame where Hale's eyes come down off the far colonnade and find the falling stand. In the still, out of context, with no stand in the picture, they do not look like a man's eyes finding a falling thing. They look like a man's eyes finding a target. Vance anchored it himself live from the truck, with the palace wall behind him in the rain and a small dressing on his palm that he did not mention and did not need. He was magnificent. That word is not affection. It is a technical assessment. He asked whether an institution that could not answer a question could be trusted with a rifle. He said the guardsman had been dismissed within the hour, and that the speed of it told you everything about how much the palace itself believed its own man. He said, and this is the line they put on the front of every paper in the realm the next morning, "They gave me a mannequin. It turned out the mannequin swings." And in the gallery, in the dark, with my hand around a drive in my pocket containing 11 minutes of the truth, I sat and I cut his cameras for him. Because that was my job, and because I told myself, in that specific and cowardly way we all have, that I had raised it, and that I had raised it with the controller, and that there was nothing further that a second mixer could reasonably do. At 22:19, the drive in my pocket became, without my knowing it, the most important object in the realm. At 07:40 the next morning, the network's legal department sealed every unbroadcast frame from the Court of Lamps pending review. And by lunchtime, a memo had gone round instructing all camera cards, ISOs, and copies from the Vigil to be surrendered to legal for consolidation. Consolidation is a word. I have been in this trade 11 years. I know what it is a word for. The realm woke up angry, and it stayed angry for 6 days. And for the first 3 of them it was angry at Wystan Hale. I did not appreciate, until I watched it happen to one man, how fast a country can decide something. By Tuesday morning there was a name for him, and the name was not his. By Tuesday afternoon, a member of the assembly had stood up and asked whether the household guard should carry rifles at ceremonial posts at all, and the question was reasonable, and it was asked in a reasonable voice, and it was asked entirely on the strength of 11 seconds of one camera angle. By Wednesday, there was a petition. By Thursday, there were 260,000 signatures on it, and Emory Vance had done a follow-up special, and the special was good, and I sat at home in the dark and watched all 42 minutes of it and did not once look away. He called it The Men Who Cannot Answer. He stood in front of the palace gates in an overcoat, and he was thoughtful and grave, and he did not gloat, which made it worse, because a gloating man can be dismissed, and a grave one cannot. He said that he bore Wystan Hale no ill will. He said he was, in a sense, a victim of the same system. He said the household had proved his entire argument for him by throwing the man away inside an hour. They will not defend him, because they cannot explain him, because there is nothing there to explain. And I remember the exact shape my hands made on the arms of the chair, because he was right about the hour. He was right that they had thrown the man away. He was right about the household, and the whole magnificent edifice of it was standing on a lie he did not know he was telling. The palace said nothing. The palace said nothing for 6 days. That silence has been described since as arrogance and as strategy and as contempt, and it was none of those things. It was Bellamy Crane sitting in a room hoping. And Wystan Hale said nothing, which surprised nobody, because he was a household guardsman, and that is what they do. But by Wednesday it had stopped looking like discipline and started looking like guilt. And by Thursday every paper in the realm was printing the fact of his silence, beside a photograph of him leaving a low gray building in the northern quarter with his collar up. He had gone home to his mother's flat. He was 31. He had been in the regiment 11 years. He had no lawyer and no money for one, and he had, we later established, precisely one conversation with a journalist in the whole of that week. A reporter from a Sunday paper found him at his door and offered him a sum of money I will not name to tell his side, and Hale said, "There isn't a side." Then he shut the door. He was, at that moment, changing the dressing on his right hand twice a day at a walk-in clinic under his own name, on his own record, in a system anybody could have checked, and not one journalist in the realm, myself included, myself first and worst, thought to check it. On the Friday, an old woman went to a newspaper. Her name was Marit Ennis. She was 78 years old, and she had come down to the capital on the early train, and she went first to the largest paper in the realm, and she sat in their reception for 4 hours. They sent a features writer down to her in the end. He was kind to her. He took 2 pages of notes, and he bought her a cup of tea, and he did not print a word. I know all of this because I later read his notes. He gave them to the board himself, unasked, and I have thought better of him ever since. She had been in the Court of Lamps. Of course she had. She is on our own camera 6, at the edge of the frame, in a gray coat, in the 3rd rank of the 12 invited relatives who attend the vigil each year, the ones whose names are on the wall. Marit Ennis had attended every vigil for 22 years, because the 8th name in the 4th row is her husband. She told the features writer that the guardsman had not struck anybody. She told him a light had begun to fall onto the plinth, and the young man had gone and caught it. She told him she had seen the whole thing plainly from 10 meters away, and she told him, this is in his notes, underlined with a question mark beside it. He put his hand on the hot part. And the features writer wrote in his notebook, in the margin, the thing that killed it. Widow, attends every year, believes in the guard, sympathetic but unusable, no corroboration, eyewitness at distance, dark, emotional context. Cameras show otherwise. Cameras show otherwise. One camera showed otherwise. The other 5 were in a legal vault 2 miles away being consolidated. That is how it works, and I want that written down somewhere, since I appear to be the one writing it. The truth had been standing in the 3rd rank the entire time, in a gray coat, and it took a train down to the capital and sat in a reception for 4 hours, and it was politely disbelieved, because a camera had already said something else. The following Monday, I went back to Lysander Pool. I had a file with me. I had spent a weekend on it. I had the camera 6 wide. I had the camera 9 ISO, and I had better tell you about camera 9 because camera 9 is where this story turns. Camera 9 was a Locktoff, a small remote head camera on a short pole, framed on the lamp itself. No operator, no cable to the truck, recording to an internal card, running the whole evening. We had put it there because the flame is the picture. It is the one image the palace itself had asked for, and it had never been shot before, and my department head had wanted 11 minutes of unbroken beauty for the archive. Camera 9 had been sitting 3 meters from the plinth, looking straight down the line of the steps, at the exact height of a man's hands, for the entire 11 minutes. Camera 9's card had never come back to the building. The runner who was supposed to collect it, a boy called Fenn, had gone out at 20:40 to strike the kit, and had been stopped at the eastern colonnade by 2 household policemen, because at 20:33 the Court of Lamps had been closed by order of the household and nobody, on any account, was going in. Fenn struck what he could reach from the colonnade and came away and filed the paperwork, and the paperwork sat in the truck's log where I found it on the Sunday, in a column marked not recovered. The card was still in the camera. The camera was still in the Court of Lamps. Both of them were inside a palace that was refusing to speak to anybody. And the third thing in my file, which I had spent Saturday night pulling off the truck's backup and which I had listened to 14 times, was the talkback. Every word said on the cruise circuit that evening had been recorded, because the truck records the circuit as a matter of course, because it always has. And on the circuit at 19:38, time-coded 62 seconds before he walked out of his mark and across the stones, was a man's voice, warm, unhurried, known to the whole realm, saying, "Get in tight on him, right in, tight enough that he has to decide something." And at 19:41, under the interview, under his own live broadcast, the same voice, off mic, to his cameraman. "Closer, he's not giving me anything. Make him move." I put all 3 things on Lysander Poole's desk on the Monday morning and I said, "He is not lying. He genuinely doesn't know what happened behind him, but he went out there to make that man move, and he said so on our own circuit, and a court will hear it in about 4 minutes flat." Poole listened to the talkback with his hands flat on the desk. Then he said, "Where did you get the circuit recording?" I have replayed that question 10,000 times. Not is that his voice, not my God, where did you get it? I said from the truck, where it lives. After the legal memo. Before, I said, which was true and which he did not believe. He was quiet for a while. Then he said, "Delia, I am going to tell you what is going to happen, and I am telling you as somebody who likes you. This building has broadcast an assault on its own anchor. Its own anchor. If that turns out to be untrue, this is not a correction. This is the end of the news division. There are 90 people on this floor. There is a palace which has already, of its own free will, dismissed the man. They dismissed him. We did not. And there is not one soul in this realm who wants to hear a second version now. There's an old woman in the north who wants to hear it," I said. He looked at me with real, exhausted dislike, and I understood that I had just made the mistake of my career, which was to be right at a man who had already decided to be wrong. "You are suspended on full pay pending an internal review of your handling of protected material," he said. "Leave the drive. Leave your card." I left the drive. I would like to record. I have never been able to say this in a way that does not sound like boasting, so I will simply state it, that I left *** drive, the one with the wide on it, which they already knew existed. The talkback and the camera 9 location log were in a jacket pocket in a locker in the basement, and I walked out of the building at 11:40 in the morning with my card confiscated and my name on a suspension notice, and I stood in the street in the rain and realized that I now had in the world exactly one asset. I knew where a camera was. I would like to say I went to the palace out of principle. What I actually did was go home and sit on the floor of my flat for 2 days. I am putting that in because everybody who tells a story like this leaves out the 2 days, and the 2 days matter. I was suspended, unemployable, 29, and I had just been told by a man of 30 years' experience that the thing I knew to be true was a thing nobody wanted. I ate very little and I watched the coverage, and on the Wednesday, Emory Vance received a broadcasting award. It had been decided months before, for a series on the fishing fleets, and he accepted it in a dinner jacket and dedicated it to everyone who is told to stand still and say nothing. And the room stood up for him. The room stood up for him. I got off the floor on Thursday morning and I put on my one good coat, and I took a bus to the palace's eastern gate, and I said to the policeman on the gate, in a voice I could hear shaking, "My name is Delia Crow. I was in the gallery on the night of the vigil. I need to speak to somebody about a camera that is still inside your courtyard." He wrote it on a pad. He was perfectly polite. He told me somebody would be in touch, and I stood in the road for an hour and a half and nobody came, and at 3:30 I went home. I went back on Friday. I went back on Saturday. On the Monday they came out to me, not the policeman. A woman of about 60 in a plain dark coat with an umbrella, who walked out through the pedestrian gate, stopped in front of me on the wet pavement, and looked at me for a long moment the way a farrier looks at a horse. "You're the one about the camera," she said. "Yes." "You said still inside the courtyard. Say that again." "Camera 9, I said. A locked-off remote on the north side of the plinth, 3 meters out, framed on the lamp. Internal card. Nobody collected it because you closed the court at 20:33. It has been recording, it has been asterisk sitting there for 11 days. The woman with the umbrella looked at me for a very long time. Then she said, "Come in out of the rain." I did not know, walking through that gate, that I was following the Princess Adela, sister to the king, colonel-in-chief of the regiment whose Lance-Corporal had walked out of it 9 days before, and I did not find out for another 20 minutes, and when I did I put my cup down so hard I chipped the saucer. She let me finish the whole thing before she said a word. She had a notebook and she used it, and she asked me to go back over the timings twice, and when I got to the part about the light stand she stopped me and made me draw it. The plinth, the steps, the stand, the sound recordist, the 3 strides. I drew it badly on the back of an envelope, and she turned the envelope round and looked at it and said, "Which hand?" "Ma'am." "You said he pushed the stand away with his forearm and then held it. Which hand held it?" "His right," I said. "The head of the lamp was live. He held it with his right hand for 1.5 seconds. The Princess Adela put down her pen. She was quiet for what felt like a very long time, and then she said, in the flattest voice I have ever heard a human being use, "There is a clinic in the northern quarter that has been dressing a burn on a right hand for 11 days. It is on his own record, under his own name." She looked up. "We found that yesterday. We did not know what it was. We assumed he had done it after." "He did it," I said, "at 19:51 and 40 seconds in your courtyard in front of 5 cameras. 5, she said. 6 went to air, 5 did not." "And where are the 5? 4 are in a legal vault in the Ashfield Road," I said. "The 5th is 30 meters from where we are sitting, on a pole in the Court of Lamps, and nobody has touched it since your policeman closed the court. And if it has not been moved, then it is looking straight down the line of the steps at the exact height of a man's hands. Here is the part I did not see, and which I have from the Crown Prince, who told it to me himself on a landing at the end of all this, when he had no reason to tell me anything. The Court of Lamps is closed by the household. It has been closed since 2033 on the night of the vigil, which means it has been closed by the same instrument that dismissed Wystan Hale, the same signature, the same hour, the same panic, and to unseal it, someone of the family must go in. The Princess Adela sent for her nephew at 10 o'clock that night. She did not tell him why. She told him to come to the eastern colonnade and to come alone, and he came in a suit with his coat over his arm, and she took him to the arch and pointed into the dark with her umbrella and said, "You close that court. Go and open it." He said, "Aunt." She said, "Do what you must." And the Crown Prince Rowan stood in the arch of the eastern colonnade with his own 4 words handed back to him, and then he took his coat off, and he walked out into the rain of the Court of Lamps. He told me it was the first time he had ever been in it alone. He told me that the flame was burning. Of course it was burning. 2 men are employed to see that it burns, and that the rain came down through the lit air around it in threads. He told me the camera was exactly where I said it was, on a pole, 3 meters north of the plinth, with a hood over the lens and rain standing in beads along the top of it, and that when he put his hands on it, the housing was cold, and that there was a small green light on the back of it that had been blinking for 11 days. He got the card out with his thumbnail. It took him 9 minutes. He is not a technical man, and he would not send for one. Then, he said, he stood up, and he was 3 feet from the remembrance wall with a camera card in his hand, and he had never in his life read the names on it. He had attended the vigil 11 times. He had stood in the front rank of it with his father. He had never read the names. He read them that night. All 406 in the rain with a card in his fist, and he told me it took him 35 minutes, and that he was not able to do the last 2 rows without difficulty. He said, "I found out afterward that Hale knows them by heart, not as a party trick. He learned them the way you learn a prayer, 4 at a time in his first year, and it took him 19 months, and he has never mentioned it to a living soul except an old woman in a gray coat. And I had stood in that court 11 times and could not have given you one." They played Camera 9 at 11:40 that night, in an office in the Eastern Range, on a laptop, with the Princess Adela and the Crown Prince and Captain Farron Slade and me standing round it, and nobody sitting. I had described it to them. Describing it is nothing. Camera 9 is looking down the line of the steps at hand height. In the foreground, bottom left, is the base of the plinth. In the middle of the frame is the lamp burning. And at the right of frame, at 19:51 and 31 seconds, the whole edge of the world tilts as a 2-meter aluminum stand comes into shot, and everything in that quiet, beautiful, unbroadcast picture happens at hand height, 3 meters away, in perfect focus. You see the stand come. You see the guardsman arrive, not his face. Camera 9 never once sees his face, which is somehow the point. You see a white glove and a red sleeve enter the frame at speed, and you see the forearm go up under the falling stand, and you see the shove that turns it away from the plinth, and you see the head of the lamp come round in its arc, and you see the white glove of the right hand come up and close on it. And then Camera 9, which has no soul and no opinions and no employer, simply records what a 2-kilowatt head does to white cotton and the hand inside it for 1.5 seconds. There is no drama in it. There is no sound. There is a small, mundane wisp off the glove, and the stand steadies, and the hand comes away, and the hand is not straight anymore. And then the red sleeve goes out of frame, back to the post, and the picture is the flame again, burning, and in the bottom right corner of the shot, for the next 90 seconds, you can see the edge of one black boot, absolutely still. Captain Slade said, "Play it again." We played it again. He watched it a 3rd time, and then he walked out of the room, and we heard him go the length of the corridor and stop, and he did not come back for 11 minutes. The Princess Adela did not move at all. When it was over, she said, quietly, to the room. He held a burning lamp with his hand so that a lamp would not go out. Then she said, "God forgive us, he was keeping the flame." 2 days later, I sat in an unheated front room in the northern quarter with Marit Ennis, and she told me what none of the tape could. She had a photograph on the mantel of a man with a wide, ugly, cheerful face in an old pattern uniform, and she gave me tea I did not want and could not refuse, and she said, "You're the one from the television." "Yes." "They didn't print me." "No," I said, "I know." "I'm sorry." She nodded as if that were the correct and expected order of things, and then she said, "Do you know who that boy is?" I said that I knew his name and his rank, and that I had 11 minutes of him on tape, and that beyond that I knew nothing at all. "My comb was his sergeant," she said. I put my cup down. "Ravensmere," she said. "The crossing. It's on the wall, 4th row, 8th along. You can find it. Everyone can find it. It's the only one with 2 letters missing because the mason ran out of stone." She smiled at that. It was clearly an old grievance and an old joke. There were 4 of them in the vehicle when it went. My comb got 3 of them out. He didn't get out himself. The last one he got out was a lad of 19 who'd been in the regiment 4 months and who was, she stopped, and started again. "Who was on fire, dear?" She let me sit with that. "He came to see me," she said. "After, in this room in that chair you're in. He was 19 and he had his hands wrapped and he sat there and he did not say one word for 40 minutes and then he said, 'I'll stand for him.' And I said, 'Stand for him where?' And he said, 'The Vigil.' And I said, 'They choose one man from the whole regiment, love, they don't just let you.' And he said, 'Then they'll choose me.'" She got up and moved the photograph an inch, for no reason, the way people do. "It took him 11 years, she said. 11 years, and he never once told anybody why he wanted it, because if you tell them why you want it they don't give it to you, they give it to the man who doesn't want it, that's how they think. So he learned the names, all of them, so it wouldn't be only comb. So it wouldn't be, she looked for the word asterisk, selfish asterisk, do you see? He wanted to stand for all 406, but he only ever wanted the one." She sat back down. "And they gave it to him this year. The regiment chose him. And he came here on the Sunday before in his suit to tell me, and he sat in that chair and cried, and then he got up and thanked me for the tea. Outside a bus went past, and the window shook in its frame. 'Now,' said Maridanes, 'you tell me on the night. When the light came down on the plinth. When it came down on the flame that has been burning for my comb, and all the rest of them for 61 years. On the one night in 11 years he had waited to stand there.'" She leaned forward. "What did they expect him to do, dear? Stand still?" I took that to the palace, and the palace convened a board. It took 4 days to assemble, because the household does nothing in less than 4 days except, apparently, destroy a man, and it sat in the old council chamber under the Princess Adela with 2 general officers, and a judge of the realm's court and a clerk. It was not public. It was, however, recorded, at Adela's specific and repeated insistence, over the objection of Bellamy Crane, who said it would set a precedent. She said, "It is intended to." And on the 3rd morning of that board, the household issued exactly 2 lines to the press, the first words the palace had spoken in 19 days. "A board of inquiry has been convened into the discharge of Lance-Corporal W. Hale. Mr. Emory Vance and the Meridian 9 Broadcasting Company are invited to attend and to bring their material." I was told that Emory Vance read that on his telephone in a car and laughed out loud with genuine delight, and told his producer that the palace had just handed him the biggest story of his life. He was, as it turned out, entirely correct. The old council chamber is a long room with a fire at one end, and a table down the middle and portraits of men in armor looking down at you from a great height, and I have never been so cold in my life. They put the network on one side of the table and the household on the other, which was, I think, a deliberate courtesy. It made it look like 2 parties to a dispute rather than an inquiry into whether a man had been thrown away. Meridian 9 sent Lysander Poole, 2 counsel, and Emory Vance. The household sent Bellamy Crane, Captain Farron Slade, the controller, the boy clerk from the guardroom, and a young man in a plain gray suit who sat at the very end of the table with his hands under it, and who did not speak for 2 days. I had not seen Wystan Hale, out of uniform before. He looked like nothing at all. He looked like a man you would ask for directions. The Crown Prince sat in the public rank at the back with his hands on his knees, and had asked, in writing, to be treated as a witness of fact. And at the head, under the largest of the armored men, sat the Princess Adela, who opened the proceedings by saying, without preamble, "This board will establish what happened in the Court of Lamps between 1951 and 1952 on the night of the vigil, and what happened in this palace in the 60 minutes that followed. Those are two separate questions, and I will not have them mixed. Mr. Vance, you are here as a witness and not as a broadcaster. If a single word of this room appears on your network before I have finished with it, I will have the household's law officers explain to you what I am able to do about that, and you will find the answer surprising. Do you understand me?" Vance said pleasantly, "Perfectly, ma'am." He was, that morning, at the absolute summit of his life. I want that recorded too, because there is no cruelty in this story worth having if you do not first admit how high the man was standing. He had a bandage he no longer needed and had kept, and an air of good-humored patience, and he sat and listened to the household's own clerk describe how the discharge order had been signed, and every word of it built his case for him like men laying bricks. Because the first day was not about him at all. The first day was the 60 minutes, and the 60 minutes were indefensible. They read the timeline into the record. I have already given it to you. The clerk read it and had to stop twice, and the second time he stopped was at 20:52 when he had to describe the surrender of the belt, and he said the thing about the left hand, and I watched Emory Vance write 2 words on a pad. The controller was asked why he had signed. He said, "Because Standing Order 9 requires the assent of the family, and I was told I had it." "By whom?" "By Mr. Crane." Bellamy Crane was asked what assent he had obtained. He said, "The Crown Prince authorized the action, ma'am." And at the back of the room, the Crown Prince Rowan stood up. He had not been called. Adela let him stand there for a moment, I think to see whether he would sit down again, and then she said, "The board will hear you now or at your proper turn. Which do you prefer?" "Now, ma'am," he said, "because he is about to be blamed for a thing I did." He came to the end of the table. He did not sit. "I was given 11 seconds of a video at the door of a state dinner," he said, "and I was told we had 60 minutes. And I said, do what you must asterisk, and I went in to dinner, and I ate 4 courses. That is my evidence. There is no more of it. I did not ask what Standing Order 9 was. I did not ask whether any other camera existed. I did not ask what the man himself had said, which, as we now know, was 1 sentence, and was true, and was the whole answer, and was in the possession of his own captain 40 minutes before I sat down to soup. Mr. Crane executed a decision. I am the reason there was a decision to execute. If this board finds that a guardsman of this household was discharged without a hearing on the strength of 1 camera angle and a man in a hurry, then the man in a hurry is sitting in front of you, and he is not Mr. Crane." Then he sat down at the table, in the public rank no longer with the household. I looked across at Wystan Hale to see what a man does with that. He was looking at the table. He looked, if anything, embarrassed, profoundly, physically embarrassed, the way a modest man looks when a room applauds him, and I realized, with a small cold shock, that in 11 days I had never once seen him ask anybody for anything. They put camera 2 up on the second morning. The network's counsel did it. He was good. He was very good. He ran the 11 seconds at full speed, and then at half, and then frame by frame, and he stopped on the frame everybody in the realm had seen on the front of every paper, the guardsman's eyes coming down, the body coming forward, and he said, "This is not ambiguous, ma'am." Whatever the context, whatever the provocation, whatever the state of the man's nerves, the household's own instinct on the night was correct. A guardsman on a ceremonial post abandoned it and came forward at speed at a member of the public, and that member of the public ended up on the ground. He sat down, and the Princess Adela said, "Thank you, Mr. Vance." Vance rose, buttoned his jacket, and gave the room the smile. "Ma'am, I want to begin by saying that I take no satisfaction in any of this. Lance-Corporal Hale is not my enemy. He is a young man who was placed by his employers in an impossible position and asked to be a statue, and when a statue is pushed hard enough." "Mr. Vance," said Adela, "were you pushed?" "I'm sorry. You have told the realm 4 times that you were struck. I am asking you a simple question of fact, and it is the last easy one you will get. Did the guardsman strike you?" And Emory Vance, standing in the old council chamber, with his counsel at his elbow and his network behind him, and 3 million people who had watched him say it, put his hand on the back of his chair and said, "He came at me at speed and I went down. I did not see what hit me. I assumed, and he stopped." He was too good not to hear it. He heard the word coming out of his own mouth the way you hear a step behind you on a dark stair. I watched a man of 51 years and 30 years broadcasting listen to himself say, "I assumed," in front of a judge of the realm's court, and I watched him decide, in about a second and a half, to keep going anyway, because there was nothing else on the table. "I assumed," he said, "that I had been struck because a man in a bearskin came out of nowhere at my head." "Thank you," said Adela. "Sit down, please." Then she said, "The board will now view camera 9. There was a small commotion at the network's end of the table, because Meridian 9's counsel had never heard of camera 9, because Meridian 9's counsel had been given 4 ISOs out of a legal vault and had been told in writing that these were all the materials that existed. The Princess Adela let him make his objection, which was a good one, and then she said, "Camera 9 was not in your vault, sir. Camera 9 has been standing in my brother's courtyard for 19 days because your runner was turned back at the colonnade by our policemen, and the card was recovered from it 8 days ago by the crown prince of this realm in the rain, and it has been in the custody of a judge of this court since 10 minutes after it was removed. Your objection is that you did not know it existed. It is noted. So does the households." Then they played it. I had seen it. I had seen it 3 times, and I had seen what it did to a man like Farron Slade, who is not a soft man, and I still was not ready for it in that room, because the old council chamber has no windows on the courtyard side, and they put it on a screen 4 feet high at the end of a table with a fire burning behind it, and so the flame in the picture and the flame in the room were burning at the same time. The picture is the lamp. That is all it is, for the first 10 minutes and 30 seconds, a small, plain, ancient flame on a stone plinth, in the rain in perfect focus at hand height. And then the world tips at the right of the frame. I watched Emory Vance's face and not the screen. I had thought about it and decided that was where I ought to be looking, and I have never regretted it. He saw the stand come in. He did not react. He did not know what it was. He had never seen it. It was behind him at the time. He saw the red sleeve and the white glove arrive at speed, and he flinched, actually flinched, because he had been told for 19 days that this was the moment he was struck, and here it was, and it was not aimed anywhere near him. He saw the forearm go up under the falling stand. He saw the shove. And then he saw the lamp head come round in its arc, and he saw a white cotton glove come up and close on it, and he sat in that chair with his mouth slightly open and watched, in silence, for 1.5 seconds, exactly what a man will hold in his bare hand to keep a flame from going over. And then the red sleeve went away, and the picture was the flame again, and in the corner of the frame there was the edge of one black boot, motionless for 90 seconds, while the sound of Emory Vance's own voice, because camera 9 had a microphone, because every camera has a microphone, came thinly across the courtyard, saying, "He struck me, ladies and gentlemen, live on air. A royal guardsman has just struck me." The clip ended. Nobody in the room said anything, And it was not the theatrical silence people write about. It was worse than that. It was 11 people all trying to be somewhere else. The Princess Adela said, "Mr. Vance, do you wish to revise your evidence?" And Emory Vance said, "And every newspaper in the realm printed it, and none of them printed the way he said it, which was like a man reading his own handwriting and not recognizing it." "Ma'am, I would like to see it again." They played it again. He watched it with his hand over his mouth. Then he said once more. They played it a third time, and at the end of the third time Emory Vance stood up, and his counsel put a hand on his sleeve and said something to him, and he took his arm away, quite gently, and he walked around the end of the table, past the judge, past the controller, past Bellamy Crane, to the far end where the young man in the plain gray suit had been sitting with his hands under the table for 2 days. "Stand up," Vance said, "please." Wystan Hale stood up. "Show me your hand," said Emory Vance. Hale did not want to. That is the thing I have never been able to convey properly in any of the times I have been made to describe it. It was not modesty, and it was not stubbornness. He looked at the Princess Adela, because he was a soldier and a request had been made of him by a civilian in a room where a superior officer was present, and he waited for permission, and she gave it with a small movement of one finger. So he brought his right hand up out from under the table, and he unwound the dressing himself, one-handed, slowly, in front of 19 people, and he laid the hand flat on the polished wood with the palm turned up. I am not going to describe it in detail. It would be the easiest paragraph in this account to write, and it would be the cheapest, and I have spent 5 years refusing to write it, and I am not going to start now for you. I will say only that it was healing, and that it was going to heal badly across 2 of the fingers, and that a hand which has closed on 250 degrees of metal for 1.5 seconds does not look like a hand that has been in a fight. It looks like exactly one thing, and it can only have come from one thing. Emory Vance looked at it for a long moment. Then he said, "Does it hurt?" And Wystan Hale, who had said one sentence in 19 days, who had turned down enough money to keep his mother for a year, who had sat in a room while a nation decided what he was, said, "Not now, sir. Why didn't you tell anyone?" Hale looked at him. It was, I think, the first time their eyes had actually met, because in the Court of Lamps he had been counting himself into the 90 and Vance had not existed. "Tell them what, sir?" he said. And that not the tape, not the talkback, not the burn, not the Prince in the Rain, that is the moment the room broke, because it was not defiance. He was not scoring a point. He genuinely, entirely, did not understand what it was that he was supposed to have told anybody. The stand had been going over. He had put it back. His hand had been in the way of putting it back. There was, to Wystan Hale, no story in any of it. There was no asterisk side asterisk. There was a lamp that had been burning for 61 years and a hand that happened to belong to him, and the arithmetic of that was so obvious to him that he had not been able to imagine anybody wanting it explained. Emory Vance stood at the end of the table with his hand on the back of a chair. And then he did the thing that I have argued about with colleagues in this trade for 5 years, and that I will defend until I am dead, because whatever else he was not a coward when it finally came to it. He turned round to the board and he said, "Ma'am, I would like to give my evidence again." He gave it for 2 hours and 11 minutes, and he did not spare himself once. He described the plan. It had been his, not Poole's, not the network's, his. He had wanted the vigil and had been refused an interview with any guardsman correctly, because guardsmen do not give interviews, and he had decided on his own in a car on the way there that the refusal was the story, and that he would demonstrate it live by standing next to one of them and asking him questions until the emptiness of the institution was visible to everybody. He was asked about the talkback. He confirmed it. He confirmed the words. He was asked what he had meant by make him move, and he said, "I meant make him move, and the judge of the realm's court said, "Meaning." And Vance said, "Meaning I wanted a reaction, any reaction. I would have taken a blink. I did not go there to be struck, and I did not want to be struck, and I want that on the record because it is the only decent thing left that I can say. But I went there to break a man's discipline in front of 3 million people, and I am aware." He stopped for the first time. "I am aware that I very nearly did it, and that the reason I failed is that at the moment I had him at his weakest, something more important than me happened behind his back." He was asked about the assault. He said, "There was no assault. I said there was. I believed there was for about 11 days, and then I stopped believing it and kept saying it for 4 more, and those 4 days are the ones I will answer for." He was asked, finally, by Adela, whether he wished to say anything to the discharged man. And Emory Vance turned in his chair and said, "Lance-Corporal, I asked you on live television whether any of the names on that wall were yours, and I asked it as a rhetorical question, because I assumed the answer was no." He waited. Hale said nothing, because Hale would have said nothing under artillery. So Marit Ennis, 78 years old in a gray coat, sitting in the 3rd rank of the public benches exactly where she had sat for 22 years, answered for him. "4th row," she said. 8th along, Sergeant Combe Ennis. He was that boy's sergeant, and he pulled him out of a fire and it killed him, and that boy has stood in that yard on one night a year for 11 years to earn the right to stand at his lamp, and you asked him if he knew any of the names." She sat back. "He knows all of them, dear," she said. "That's the trouble with you. You thought you were talking to nobody." The board reported 11 days later. It found that no assault had occurred, that Lance-Corporal Hale's departure from his post was an act of protection of the Lamp of Remembrance, and was consistent in every particular with his duty, that the injury to his right hand was sustained in that act, that his conduct throughout, including his silence, had been, in every respect, that of a guardsman of this household. It found that the discharge was void. Not overturned, not commuted, void asterisk, which is a word of some violence in that context, because it means the thing never lawfully happened, and it meant that a man who had been called a disgrace by a whole realm had, in the eye of the law, never stopped being a guardsman for a single second, not even while he sat on his mother's sofa with his hand in a bowl of water. It found that Standing Order 9 was a provision by which this household may be induced, in 1 hour, to do a wrong it cannot undo in a year, and it recommended its repeal. And it found, this is the paragraph they read out first, and Adela read it herself, and she looked up from the page to say it, that the fault lay with the household before it lay with anybody else. That the network had lied, and the anchor had been reckless, and the newspapers had been lazy, and that none of it would have mattered for 5 minutes if the household had simply asked its own man what had happened, before it took his belt. "An institution," she read, "which will not defend a man who has kept faith with it has already told the world what it is worth. We are fortunate. He kept faith with us anyway. The king saw him alone. I was not in the room, and I do not know one word of what was said there, and neither does anybody else, because King Alaric has never spoken of it, and Wystan Hale has certainly never spoken of it. And when I asked the Princess Adela much later, when she had come in her way to tolerate me, she said, 'It is not yours, Miss Crow. Not everything is a record. But I know what was done, because it was done publicly, and because they made a point of doing it publicly, and I was there. They restored him in the Court of Lamps. Not in a hall, not on a balcony, not with a band. On a gray afternoon in the last week of that autumn, with the court opened for the second time in its history, and the 12 invited relatives of the fallen standing in their 3 ranks, and the regiment drawn up under the eastern colonnade. Marit Ennis was in the front rank in the gray coat, and someone had given her a chair, and she had refused it. Captain Farron Slade gave him back his belt. He laid it across his own 2 hands and offered it, which is the drill, and Wystan Hale took it in both of his, which is also the drill, and the right one closed on the leather and did not come away, and I saw what that cost him, and so did everybody else, and nobody said a word about it then or afterwards. Then King Alaric read the order. He was 71 that year, and his voice does not carry the way it once did, and he read it slowly. The Court of Lamps, he said, would never again be filmed. The permission he had given, he said, had been given by him freely in the belief that letting the realm see this place would honor it, and he had been wrong, and the wrongness of it was his alone, and he would not have it laid at any other door. From that day the court was returned to what it had always been, and there would be no cameras in it, not for the crown, not for the press, not for the household itself, and the only record of what happened in the Court of Lamps would be what was carried out of it in the memory of the people standing in it. Standing Order 9 was repealed in its entirety with immediate effect. In its place, he said, the household would enter into its standing orders a rule requiring that no man or woman of the household be discharged, suspended, or publicly disowned before that person has been asked, by an officer face to face, what happened, and has been permitted to answer. They have never given that rule a formal name. Everybody calls it Hale's Rule. He is said to detest this. And then, last, the king said that the Long Vigil at the Lamp of Remembrance would no longer be assigned by the regiment year by year, because a thing chosen every year is a thing given to the man whose turn it is, and this household had learned what it was worth to have it stood by a man whose turn it was not. The vigil would be held by a warden of the lamp, appointed for life, who would stand it every year until he could not stand it any longer, and who would then choose his own successor and teach him the names. The first, said King Alaric, is Lance-Corporal Wystan Hale, who kept the flame with his hand. Emory Vance was not there. He had asked to come, and had been told, courteously, by the Princess Adela, that the court was closed, and that this was now permanent and applied to everybody, and that he might take some comfort from the fact that he had helped to make it so. He resigned from Meridian 9, on the day the board reported. He read a correction on air first, 11 minutes of it, alone at the desk, no auto cue, no music, and he told the realm exactly what he had done, and exactly what he had said on his own cruise circuit at 1938, and he played camera 9 in full, and then he said that a man had been asked to be a statue, and had instead been the only person in that courtyard doing his job, and that he had spent 19 days calling him a mannequin. Then he took off his microphone and stood up and walked out of shot while the program was still on the air, which is a thing that is not done, and which people who saw it still talk about. Lysander Poole went with him, and 2 others, and the news division survived. Bellamy Crane resigned before he could be dismissed, and is, I am told, doing well in another line of work, and I hope he is. I have found over 5 years that I have no appetite at all for wanting bad things to happen to Bellamy Crane, who was a frightened man with a telephone. I was reinstated, and I did not go back. I am the archivist of the Realm's Court of Record now, which is a smaller job in a colder building, and I keep documents that nobody looks at, and I find I have a considerable appetite for it. Somebody has to keep the tape that nobody wants. I learned that from a broadcast that ran 1 camera when it had 9. The Crown Prince came to see me before I left the capital. He stood on my landing in a coat with the collar up and would not come in. He said, I wanted to ask you something, and I would like a plain answer. I said he could have one. If Poole had run the wide, he said, that night, at 10 o'clock, if your controller had put the truth on the air at the top in front of 3 million people, would we have got him back? I thought about it. No, sir, I said. You'd already dismissed him. You did that in 60 minutes with 1 camera. Everything after that was people trying to be right about a thing that had already been done. He nodded slowly and looked down the stairwell for a while. That's what I thought, he said. I wanted to hear somebody else say it. Then he thanked me and went down, and I have not seen him since except from a long way away, in a crowd, standing bareheaded. I go up for the vigil now. Every year on the last evening of autumn, on my own money, on a train, in my one good coat. You cannot get in. Nobody can get in, that is the point of it, and it was the whole point of it all along, and it took a broadcast, a lie, a burned hand and a repealed standing order for anybody to understand what the king had meant. But you can stand outside the eastern colonnade with 100 or so others in the dark, in the rain at the railings, and you can see, through the arch and across the wet flags, a small piece of the court of lamps, a corner of the plinth and the flame, and the shoulder and the arm of one man in a red tunic who does not move. He is a warrant officer now. His hand did heal badly, exactly as they said, and it makes no difference to him. He carries the rifle on the other side and has been permitted, uniquely in the regiment, to wear a plain glove that fits. Marit Innie stood at those railings with me for 3 years, and then she stopped being able to come. And then she stopped, and her name is not on the wall because she did not die at the Ravensmere crossing. She died in a bed in the northern quarter at 81 with a photograph of a wide, ugly, cheerful face on the table beside her. But I am told that on the night she died, the warden of the lamp went to the 4th row of the remembrance wall and stood at the 8th name for a while in the dark, out of hours, when nobody at all was watching. There is no tape of that. There is no tape of anything in there any more. There is only what people carry out. So I will carry this out and set it down and be finished with it. At 19:51 and 31 seconds, on the night the whole realm was watching the wrong camera, a light began to fall on a flame that had burned for 61 years, and a man who had waited 11 years to stand beside it broke his stillness and put his hand into it, and was, for that, called a brute and a disgrace and a mannequin who swings, and dismissed by his own people inside the hour, and did not say one word in his own defense, not because he was too proud to, but because it had genuinely never occurred to him that keeping the flame was the kind of thing a man ought to be thanked for. They gave him a lamp to guard in the end. He would tell you, if he ever said anything at all, that he had one already.